My name is Avery Collins. I'm 32, and tonight I learned I was being erased. I heard my father say every dollar, every property, every piece of our family's legacy would go to my brother. 5 minutes later, my mother texted me, "Don't call or come anymore. It's better this way." Her words lit up my phone like a warning flare. I just stared, typed back a quiet, "Sure," and set the phone down. They thought that was the end, but what they didn't know was it was only the beginning. Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by your own family. I'm sharing this because no one warns you how deeply it cuts when the people who raised you decide you're disposable. Stay with me. What happened next is the part they never expected me to survive. I grew up in a house that looked warm from the outside. Collins' house. 2 stories, white shutters, a porch swing my mother insisted on, even though no one ever used it. People used to say we looked like some postcard family from a small-town magazine. But if you've ever lived inside a house built on quiet favoritism, you know looks mean nothing. Warm lighting doesn't fix the cold. My earliest memory of imbalance is stupid, small, one of those things you tell yourself doesn't matter. I was 8. Blake was 11. We were sitting at the dinner table, the smell of roast chicken filling the whole room, that heavy garlic butter scent my mother loved. I reached for the drumstick, the one part I actually liked, and my dad tapped my wrist with the fork. Not hard, not loud, just enough. "Let your brother take it," he said. Blake didn't even like drumsticks, but he grinned and took it anyway. I swallowed the moment, but it was deeper than I thought. By the time I was 13, I'd learned how to shrink myself, how to walk quietly on hardwood floors, how to make my good news sound like a suggestion. When my poster design won the district competition, I remember clutching the certificate so tightly it crumpled at the edges. The auditorium was buzzing with kids, that chalk dust smell mixed with old carpet and fluorescent lights flickering on and off. I kept scanning the back row, waiting for Dad to show up. He promised he would. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. But the seat stayed empty. When my name was called, I walked up alone, the applause sounding thin. That night, when I showed Dad the certificate, he nodded once without looking up from his laptop and said, "Good, now focus on real skills, not doodling." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would come back later with interest. Blake, meanwhile, lived in a different world. Not because he was smarter or kinder, he wasn't, but because he was the son Dad believed could carry the Collins name. Everything came easy for him. At 17, Blake lost $8,000 trying to day trade crypto before it was cool. He stood in the kitchen, pale as chalk, his voice shaking as he confessed. I braced myself for Dad's eruption. Instead, Dad clapped him on the back and said, "We'll fix it." A week later, Blake got a new laptop and a second chance. That same month, I forgot to submit a form for a summer internship. Just forgot. A normal teenage mistake. Dad didn't look at me for 2 days. When I left for New York at 18, with a portfolio full of sketches and a heart full of guilt, it was the first thing I had ever done for myself. The bus ride smelled like old leather and diesel, and the rain streaking the windows made the world blur by. I thought I'd come home different. I thought distance would help. I didn't know that leaving would only make Dad see me as the daughter who walked away. New York was chaos, noise, and survival. I worked late shifts at a coffee shop with a leaky faucet and floors that stuck to your shoes. I ate dollar slices, lived in a room so small I could touch both walls if I stretched. But it was mine, and every month I sent money home. Mum's heart treatments added up quickly, and no one else could cover the bills. Blake was too busy rebranding Dad's restaurant to bother earning anything real. Dad never thanked me. Mum sent a single text once. "You're very sweet, honey." That was it. I kept telling myself it was enough. I didn't know it then, but each wire transfer was building the weapon I'd eventually use. The holidays were the worst. I would take the cheapest bus home because flights were too expensive, arriving at midnight to a quiet neighborhood dripping with Christmas lights. Inside, Mum would hug me, fragile and quick. Dad would shake my hand like I was a visiting guest. Blake would stroll down the stairs with that grin, wearing some designer jacket he borrowed money to buy. Christmas morning always told the truth. Blake got the expensive gifts, the leather jacket, the smartwatch, the drone one year that filled the living room with its buzzing wings. I got scarves, mugs, and once a self-help book about finding discipline in creative careers. I swallowed it, every time. Because it was family, because I wanted to belong. I didn't know that the need for belonging would one day cost me everything. When I finally graduated, Dad didn't come. Mum sent flowers, probably picked by a florist at random. Blake texted me, "Congrats, sis, make us proud." I should have realised then. Pride was a one-way street in our house. But I didn't. I came back. And the moment my feet hit Portland soil again, destiny started writing the chapters that led to the night I'd be erased. When I moved back to Portland, I told myself things would be different. I had a degree, a portfolio, and a spine made stronger by cramped New York apartments and night shifts that stretched until dawn. I rented a small place downtown, a one-bedroom with cold blue lighting and floors that creaked at night. But it felt like freedom. I remember standing in the empty living room the first evening, hearing the hum of traffic through the thin windows, thinking, maybe now they'll see me. They didn't. My first real project was a renovation proposal for one of Dad's older restaurants, the one on Alder Street with the faded awning and the cracked tile floors. I spent weeks drafting concepts, new lighting, a refreshed brand palette, repurposed wood for warmth. I stayed up until 3 a.m. tracing lines that blurred from exhaustion. When I finished, I printed the proposal on thick paper, tucked it into a neat folder, and drove to the house. The moment I stepped inside, the old familiar smell hit me. Linda's lavender candles, mixed with the heavy scent of something roasting. Blake was at the kitchen island, swirling a glass of wine like he was a sommelier. He glanced up at my folder. "Another little art project," he said. I ignored him and handed the proposal to Dad. Robert flipped through it quickly, the pages rustling like they annoyed him. "We'll see," he muttered. Then he set the folder beside a stack of mail, unopened. Blake smirked. I told myself to breathe. But the truth was clear. He didn't even read it. That night, driving home, the rain beat so hard on the windshield it felt like it was trying to punch its way in. I didn't know it then, but that folder would come back in a much bigger room. Another memory comes at me like a blunt object whenever I think of that year. It was late autumn, the air sharp enough to sting your nose. I had just helped Mum through another round of medication renewals. She sat at the dining table, her hands trembling slightly as she signed forms. Blake walked in, kissed her on the cheek and said, "Don't worry, Mum, I'll take care of everything." Dad nodded approvingly. I stood there with receipts still warm from my pocket, listening to them act like Blake had saved the day. Mum didn't even glance at me. I swallowed it again, but it scraped the whole way down. There was also the night Blake crashed his SUV into the side of a dumpster behind the restaurant. He claimed the brakes acted weird. The truth? He was drunk. I found out because Kelsey called me at 1 a.m., voice shaking. "Avery, please, can you meet me? He won't listen to me." I arrived to find Blake leaning against the dented car, laughing into the cold air. When Dad showed up, he didn't yell, didn't shame him, just sighed and said, "Everyone makes mistakes. Let's get this fixed quietly." I stood there in my coat, arms crossed, breath fogging in the air, invisible as ever. The moment that branded itself into my memory came a month later. I was at the house again, dropping off paperwork Mum said she needed. As I reached the landing near the stairs, I heard voices, my father's low growl and my mother's soft hum of agreement. "Blake is the future," Dad said. "Avery is just temporary support." That word, temporarily, hit me like a hammer. Temporary. Like I was a placeholder until something better came along. I leaned against the wall, breath caught in my throat. My hands were shaking so violently I had to tuck them into my pockets. They didn't know I was there. They never did. And then came the holiday that changed everything. Thanksgiving. The house glowed with warm lights, the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey floating through the air. Blake arrived late, wearing an expensive jacket he certainly didn't earn. greeting everyone with that charming grin. I sat across the table, watching as Dad served Blake the biggest slice of turkey, praising him for some vague business idea. When Mum handed me my plate, she said, "Maybe next year you'll bring something meaningful to share." Meaningful. I had been paying their bills for years. I didn't show it. I didn't cry. I just nodded. But something inside me shifted like ice cracking. When I left that night, the cold air bit at my face, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. I walked to my car slowly, every step stiff, and in that quiet driveway, lit by the dim porch light, I finally let myself whisper the truth I had been avoiding. They'll never choose you, no matter how much you give. I didn't know it then, but I was standing on the edge of the moment they'd finally push me out completely. The real unraveling didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet cuts, thin, almost invisible, until one day I looked down and realized I was bleeding everywhere. It started with a family meeting, the kind my father called only when he needed something. It was early winter, the rain turning the windows of Colin's house into blurry watercolor streaks. I walked in, shaking off my coat, still smelling faintly of damp concrete from the parking garage outside. Robert sat at the head of the table. Blake lounged beside him, legs stretched out, tapping his phone. Linda stood by the stove, stirring something, though I doubt she even knew what she was cooking. Dad didn't bother with greetings. "We're restructuring the Alder Street location," he said, folding his hands like he was chairing a board meeting. "We need support, financial support." I waited, expecting details, maybe a pitch, maybe even an acknowledgement that I was an actual architect with restaurant design experience. Instead, he slid a piece of paper toward me. A number. 50,000. My throat tightened. "You're asking me for a loan?" Blake scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. It's family." I stared at the number again. You don't ask someone for 50,000 like it's a carton of... "Is there a plan for paying it back?" Dad leaned back, smirked slightly. "We'll handle that later." Meaning, no. Linda finally turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Sweetheart, your brother is trying really hard with the business. This could help him." Her eyes pleaded with me in that soft, needy way she always used when she wanted me to save Blake from himself. A familiar pressure settled on my chest, the old childhood weight. So I said yes. But walking out of the house that night, I felt the first real crack inside me. The cold air stung my face, and for the first time I wondered if giving was the only reason they kept me around. That crack widened 2 weeks later. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt grey even indoors. Eddie swung by my office cubicle holding 2 coffees. "Congrats, Avery," he said casually. "Management finally approved..." There it was, a project announcement for the Alder Street renovation, with a design lead listed. Not me. Blake Collins. I read it twice, my stomach dropping so fast it felt like the floor gave out. Blake, who had never drafted a blueprint in his life, who once asked me if load-bearing walls were still a thing, was listed as the creative lead. Eddie frowned. "I thought this was your project." "It was," I whispered. It felt like being erased in real time. I grabbed my bag and walked out into the parking lot, the wind slicing across my face. I stood beside my car, the metal cold under my hands, swallowing a feeling that tasted too familiar, being invisible again. That evening, I went... He shrugged. "You should be grateful. Your work will be used. Isn't that what creative types care about?" Creative types. Like we were a different species. I opened my mouth, but Dad's voice boomed from the hallway. "Blake represents the business. Clients trust him." I spun around. "He didn't do any of the work." Robert's expression hardened. "Don't raise your voice in my house." It wasn't about the project. It was about hierarchy, about reminding me where I belonged, beneath Blake. That night, when I got home, I couldn't even turn on the lights. I just sat on the floor of my living room, the city humming outside, feeling the cold crawl up my spine. The next blow came fast. The Alder Street location failed a health inspection. 2 minor issues, nothing that couldn't be... "What? That layout was preliminary." "Dad's furious," he snapped. "He said this is on you." And just like that, the blame was mine. A draft concept turned into a convenient scapegoat. They needed someone to point at, and I didn't fight back fast enough. Later that night, Linda texted. Not a call, a text, full of passive disappointment. Avery, your father is very stressed. You should have been more careful. I stood in my kitchen staring at those words. I should have been more careful. Like I was some reckless child, not the person who had spent years paying their bills. I didn't reply. 2 days passed before Kelsey reached out. She asked to meet, her message short. Please, it's important. Receipts, transfers, account summaries, lines of numbers bleeding across the pages. Blake has been taking money from the restaurants, she whispered. Thousands, every month. My chest tightened. Why are you showing me this? Because he told your parents you refused to help, she said, voice trembling. He told them the inspection failure was your fault, that you don't care about the family. I felt the ground shift, the cold air slicing through me. Why would he lie like that? Kelsey looked away. Because as long as you're the villain, they won't look too closely at him. That was the night something inside me stopped begging to be loved. When my mother's message lit up my screen, the room around me seemed to tilt. The blue glow of the phone washed over my hands, and for a moment everything felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life, someone else's defeat. Don't call or come anymore. It's better this way. I read it 3 times, each word colder than the last. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from the bank. Automatic payment confirmed. Email tabs, invoices, scheduled payments, overdue notifications. They all stared back at me like an accusation. It was then I finally saw the full list. Utilities, equipment repairs, emergency loans, subscriptions tied to the restaurant, medical insurance, credit lines, Blake's business maintenance fees. Line after line of debts I'd been silently carrying. Not anymore. The first cancellation was almost accidental. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate across the counter until the battery died. The next morning, I woke to Julie Grant, the project manager I'd met at a conference months ago, wanted to talk about the sustainability-focused renovation concept I'd mentioned to her casually over cocktails. The same concept Dad and Blake had called unrealistic. I typed back immediately. Absolutely. Tomorrow works for me. When I closed the laptop, a strange warmth settled in my chest. Hope, maybe. Or something better. But the peace didn't last. That evening, as I headed to the parking garage, footsteps echoed behind me. Quick, sharp, closing the distance. I turned. Blake stepped out from between the cars, eyes wild, jaw clenched. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across his face. You think you can ignore us? He snapped. Turn off everything. Make us look stupid. I stayed still. I'm not responsible for your choices. You owe us, he hissed. You owe this family. I laughed. It wasn't intentional, just a bitter sound that slipped out. I owe you nothing. His face twisted. Give me access back, now. Or what? I asked quietly. He took a step closer, and for a second I saw something dangerous flicker across his expression. But before he could speak, the elevator dinged, and Eddie walked out with 2 other co-workers. Everything okay, Avery? Eddie asked, stepping forward. Blake backed up. This isn't over. Yes, I said. It is. He stormed off, muttering under his breath, his footsteps receding into the echoing garage. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice hadn't cracked once. That felt like a victory. I thought that would be the end of it. Blake's tantrum, the barrage of calls, the financial reliance crumbling beneath them. But life has a way of giving you the last piece only when you're ready to see the whole picture. 3 days later, Kelsey showed up at my office. She looked exhausted, mascara smudged under her eyes like she'd been crying for days. I ushered her into a small conference room, the walls coated in whiteboard paint, sketches and notes ghosting faintly beneath the surface. He doesn't know I'm here, she said immediately, voice shaking. I nodded slowly. Okay. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folder, Same one she had shown me in the park, but thicker now, heavier. She slid it across the table like it was radioactive. "Avery, there's more," she whispered. Inside were receipts, bank statements, transfers from Colin's Heritage Dining to Blake's personal accounts, flights to Vegas, jewelry charges, high-limit cash withdrawals, cross-referenced with restaurant funding requests. "What is this?" I breathed. 3 years, she said, voice cracking. "He's been doing it for 3 years." My pulse hammered in my ears. "And your parents don't know?" She shook her head. "They don't want to know. They believe everything he says. He told them you were unstable, jealous, that you hated the restaurant." I closed the folder. "Why are you helping me?" She looked down. "Because he lies to me too, and I can't marry someone who destroys everyone around him." Her voice wavered. "And because you're the only one who's ever been honest with me." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Kelsey." She nodded, relief washing across her face. Then she added softly, "I think he's in deeper trouble than your parents realize. Someone has to stop him." When she left, the room felt too small, too bright. I stared at the folder for a long time, part fear, part vindication, part something sharper. This was more than leverage. This was the truth. And the truth was about to flip the Collins family narrative upside down. I packed the folder into my bag, zipped it shut, and whispered to the empty room, "All right, let's finish this." Bridge Central Cafe always smelled like burnt espresso and wet wool in the winter. The kind of place where conversations felt heavier, like the walls absorbed secrets. When I walked in that afternoon, the doorbell chimed softly behind me, and for a brief second, I wondered if I'd turn around and walk out. But then I saw them. My family sat at a corner booth beneath a flickering pendant lamp. Robert was at the edge of the seat, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. Linda sat beside him, fingers twisting the strap of her purse, eyes darting anxiously toward the door. And Blake leaned back with one arm stretched across the booth, looking like he owned the place, like I was just a nuisance they had to deal with before dinner. The moment I approached, Robert spoke, his voice clipped. "You're late." I wasn't. I checked my watch. "It's 1:59. He ignored that. "Sit." I did, placing my bag beside me. The server approached, but no one ordered anything. The air was too tight, too sharp. Robert folded his hands. "Your little stunt has jeopardized the entire business. We need those payments reinstated immediately." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face steady. "They weren't my responsibility to begin with." Blake scoffed. "Oh, please, don't start acting like some martyr. You helped because it was the right thing to do. Now do it again." I looked at him slowly. His smug grin, his pristine jacket, his unearned confidence. Then I spoke quietly. "No." Blake blinked. "What did you say?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not restoring anything." His face twisted. "You selfish—" "That's enough," Robert cut in sharply. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Avery, we know you've been emotional lately, but the business is in trouble and your brother is under pressure. We expect you to step up." Step up, like I hadn't been stepping up my entire adult life. Linda finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, we just need a little help. For the family. For Blake." I reached into my bag. "You should see something first." I placed the first folder on the table, the one Kelsey had given me. Blake frowned, reaching for it, but Robert snatched it first. The pages rustled loudly in the cafe's quiet hum. The moment he saw the bank statements, his face blanched. "What is this?" he demanded. "Evidence," I said softly. 3 years' worth of Blake siphoning restaurant money into his personal accounts. Trips to Vegas, jewelry, cash withdrawals, restaurant maintenance that never happened. Blake's chair screeched against the floor as he stood abruptly. "These are fake! She's lying!" Linda pressed a hand to her chest. "Blake, please tell me she's lying." He sputtered. "It's taken out of context. Dad, don't listen." But before he could finish, another voice cut in. "I wouldn't recommend finishing that sentence." All three of them snapped their heads toward the man who had just approached our booth. Mark Ramirez. Dark suit, steady gaze, the calm energy of someone holding a loaded deck. Robert frowned. "Who are you?" "My attorney," I said. Blake barked a laugh. "You brought a lawyer? For what?" Mark placed a neat stack of files on the table. "For the part where we discuss embezzlement, tax fraud, and business mismanagement. Charges your sister will not be responsible for, despite what your financial records suggest." Robert's eyes widened. "Charges?" Mark opened the first file. "Your son's pattern of withdrawals exceeds what could be considered an error. And the falsified receipts? Not subtle. The IRS won't be impressed." Blake's face was drained of colour. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," Mark replied calmly. "And the authorities will be too." The silence that followed felt like the entire cafe held its breath. Finally, Robert whispered, "How could you do this?" Blake turned desperate. "Dad, I did it for the business. To what?" I asked quietly. "To bankrupt everyone? To hide your habits?" Linda's voice cracked. "Blake, we trusted you." He slammed a fist on the table. "I'm the one who was supposed to take over. I'm the one who matters. She's the one who left us." I leaned in slightly. "No, I'm the one you used." The words seemed to echo. Robert swallowed hard. "Avery, what do you want?" It was the first time he'd asked me anything without an order behind it. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my bag again and pulled out a second folder, the proposal I'd brought to them months ago, the one Dad didn't bother reading. I placed it gently on the table. "I took this to Harborstone Hospitality," I said. "They loved it. They bought it. 32 restaurants, full renovation rollout, $600,000 plus royalties." Linda gasped softly. Robert stared like the world had tilted. Blake shook his head in disbelief. "You stole our idea," Blake sputtered. I looked at him with a calm I didn't feel. "You rejected it. Big difference." Mark nodded. "She retains full ownership. The contract is airtight." Robert's voice broke. "Avery, you could have helped your family." I held his gaze. "I did, for years, and you didn't even see me." No one spoke. The cafe sounds, clinking dishes, grinding espresso, filled the void. Then I stood, gathering my bag. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I felt strange, clear. Linda's voice trembled behind me. "Avery, please, don't go." I turned just enough to see her. "You told me not to call, not to come, remember?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Blake took a step toward me, panic creeping into his tone. "Avery, don't you dare walk out now. You owe us." I met his eyes, letting every ounce of truth sharpen my voice. "I don't owe you anything." He froze. Robert stared at the folder on the table, shoulders sagging with the realization of what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away. I walked to the door. The bell chimed softly as I pushed it open. Outside, the rain had started again, cold, steady, cleansing. As it hit my skin, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not revenge, freedom. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the moment you stop asking to be chosen. The days after the cafe confrontation felt strangely quiet, as if the world had finally stopped pressing its thumb against my throat. I woke up without panic clawing at my ribs. I made coffee without checking my phone. I walked to work without waiting for the next demand, the next guilt-laced text. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. 2 weeks later, I signed the final contract with Harborstone. Julie shook my hand, her grip firm, her smile real. "You've got talent, Avery," she said. "The kind people usually have to fight for." I almost laughed. If she only knew. But all I said was, "Thank you." Because gratitude is different when it comes without strings. My studio became a sanctuary, drafting tables covered in samples, soft music humming from a speaker, Eddie cracking jokes from the hallway as he stole my pens. There were moments I caught myself waiting, out of habit, for my phone to buzz with some crisis from home. But the screen stayed still. Instead, the calls came from contractors, architects, and new clients. People who valued me not for what I could give them, but for what I could create. Months passed before someone from my old life reached out. Aunt Marie called on a Thursday evening, her voice carrying that delicate mix of pity and nosy curiosity only distant relatives can perfect. "Honey, I thought you should know. It's all gone. The restaurants, the accounts." I listened quietly as she listed it all. Bankruptcy filings, lawsuits, Blake under investigation. Robert works at a hardware store. Linda folding clothes at Macy's on the weekends. I waited for the ache to rise. It didn't. Marie hesitated. "They asked about you." I looked out my studio window at the skyline, the last traces of sunset painting the glass. "I hope they're okay," I said, and I meant it, but that didn't mean I was going back. That night, while closing my laptop, I noticed an unread email. No name, no signature, just one line. "I think you should know. Blake is trying something again." I stared at it for a long moment, then let a quiet, cold smile pull at the corner of my mouth. They thought the story ended when I walked out of that cafe. They had no idea. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe and stay with me. Stories like mine don't end with one confrontation or one goodbye. They echo, they shape you, and sometimes they circle back when you least expect it. If any part of this reminded you of your own past, you're not alone. Leave a comment, share where you're watching from, and tell me what part hit you the hardest. Because trust me, this story isn't over.